Hey everyone, welcome to Wealth Redefined. I'm your host, Michael Reynolds, independent financial advisor, owner of Elevation Financial, and thanks for joining me today. Glad you are here as always. We are talking about one of my favorite topics today, which is budgeting. I know, budgeting, not everyone's favorite thing, but it's one of my favorite things, and I am on a mission to constantly help others become a little more excited about budgeting. So specifically, we're going to talk about irregular income and budgeting with irregular income today. Irregular income is a reality for a lot of us, business owners, self-employed people, 1099 contractors, real estate agents, service providers, a lot of people that are, maybe in sales, commission sales. So a lot of times we are in a situation where we have irregular income. Many of us have kind of the steady paycheck. It's every 2 weeks we get kind of the set amount and it's pretty cut and dry, but many of us don't. Many of us have irregular income to contend with. And so that can make it a little more difficult sometimes to budget. So we're going to talk about how to budget with an irregular income. What are some of the tips, the tricks, the guides, the kind of how-tos on budgeting with irregular income? So let's get started. First of all, I always like to start out with my budgeting is not a dirty word speech. I know a lot of people are very anti-budgeting for various reasons. Some people just don't like to budget because it's just hard and it's considered not fun, and it can seem restrictive and limiting and all these things. And other people, there are financial professionals and financial influencers I know that are very anti-budgeting. They say, budgeting is not, it's silly. You shouldn't worry about budgeting. You should just kind of whatever they say, do things a different way, but they're very anti-budgeting and they think budgeting is just sort of a dismal kind of negative thing. I do not think that at all. I think budgeting is awesome. I think budgeting is very positive. I think budgeting can be very empowering, give you a lot of freedom. Budgeting in general can bring a lot of benefits to your life, in my opinion. Again, with the caveat, there's no one size fits all. I know that some people have systems of money that work for them, and that is fine. I, for one, just happen to think budgeting is very, very useful and productive and high value. So big fan of budgeting. So let's get started with some myths or misconceptions or common objections to budgeting. Especially when it comes to irregular income. So one big myth that we're going to talk about is, it's impossible to budget with variable income. Some people think that because you don't have a kind of a steady paycheck, it's really difficult or impossible to budget your money. Other people say, well, I'll just out earn the need to budget. They just say, well, I'll just make enough money that I don't really have to worry about it. Another objection is budgeting is so boring. Some people say that budgeting is just so boring. The thought of the word budgeting just kind of makes them just go to sleep. Or budgeting is too time consuming. People say budgeting is so time consuming, they don't want to spend time on it. Or some people say, well, I can do a budget in my head. I don't really have to worry about, doing something formally. I can kind of keep track of my spending in my head. Or they say, I budget by keeping track of everything I spend. And then another one is, budgeting means I'll have to give up my Starbucks or whatever their particular daily indulgence is. So I would venture to say that, and we're not going to unpack all these myths today. It's just sort of, I like to bring up the objections because I've heard them all. And I want to say that I could unpack each one of these individually, and they are absolutely not true. From the irregular income to the budgeting is boring, to time consuming, to doing in your head, all these things can be overcome. They are not necessarily true. So I wouldn't let these budgeting myths get in the way and keep you from embracing a budget. So let's talk about why budgeting can be useful. So first of all, budgeting helps you understand your cash flow. If you don't understand your cash flow, you have a really hard time making intentional decisions with your money. You have a hard time saving. You're going to have a hard time keeping spending under control. You're going to have a very short-term outlook when it comes to planning ahead. So it's going to be very difficult to understand where you're headed without understanding your cash flow. Budgeting also tends to lower stress. My experience has been that both for me personally and for people I've worked with, that when you really get into a groove with budgeting and you really start to do it effectively, your stress level starts to significantly decrease. You really start to see a reduction in stress level because you are so empowered, because you are so in control of your money that you don't have the same worries that you did before. You don't have that low level anxiety in your pit of your stomach because you just don't really know what's happening with your money. It also empowers you to create better decisions. You make better decisions overall when you budget, and it gives you freedom. To me, budgeting is freedom. Some people see it as restrictive, like, oh, if I budget, I'm gonna have to give up my Starbucks and I have to, worry about my spending, and it feels so restrictive. Honestly, I think when you budget formally in an organized manner, you really have a lot more freedom. You have the freedom to make better decisions, the freedom to use your money the way you want because you have outlined your cash flow in such a way that you're intentional about it. It's so much more freedom. So I'll try and get off my soapbox about it now, but just rest assured that there is a lot of good that can come from budgeting. It's not the negative, depressing thing you may think. so so let's talk about tools. Whenever I talk about budgeting, I would be remiss if I didn't mention my favorite tool in the world, which is You Need a Budget, or YNAB for short. Now, when it comes to irregular income, I think YNAB is the best. I think YNAB is the best tool overall, just in general, period. But especially when it comes to irregular income, YNAB really, really shines. Some of the more popular tools out there are Mint, YNAB, EveryDollar. Some people use Excel, a spreadsheet. Not a big fan of a spreadsheet because it's so isolated. You can't really link it up with your bank, and it's kind of clunky in my opinion. But some people love spreadsheets. Some people like Mint. Some people like EveryDollar. There are other apps out there as well. But I'm going to say that if you are on irregular income and your cash flow is variable, then YNAB is going to really shine. And YNAB is not free. It's about $12 a month, I believe. But if you go to youneedabudget.com or just Google YNAB, you'll find it. And it takes some doing to get set up, but I am a big fan of taking the time to get to know YNAB and learn how to use it. So when you're using YNAB, it's going to help you kind of categorize and cascade your priorities that we're going to talk about here in a minute. So my favorite budgeting tool, again, YNAB. If you're just willing to take a suggestion and run with it, go sign up for YNAB and give it a shot. So before we get to kind of prioritizing budgeting, let's talk about your buffer, your cash buffer that's important. So the first thing that you want to do if you're going to manage your budget with irregular income is establish a strong short-term savings. My goal these days is to have a minimum of 6 months of expenses in the bank. It used to be, 3 to 6 months is kind of the rule of thumb, so to speak. I think minimum 6 months because the pandemic has taught us many things. One of them is a big pile of cash is really useful when we have a lot of volatility in the job market and income and the economy, and just lots of things are in flux. Having a 6 month plus buffer in cash is really, really useful. And we don't always know what's going to happen. So I would recommend trying to get 6 months of expenses in the bank. So if you lost income altogether, you could operate your household for 6 months while you're working on something else. So the purpose of the short-term savings is multifaceted. So it's for your emergency fund. So again, in the example I used, if income is interrupted, then that is your emergency fund you're going to use to kind of get through to weather the storm. Also, whatever additional amount is saved on top of that 6 month buffer, or whatever you decide your buffer is, that is for large purchases. Things like, buying a car, down payment on a home, large appliances, things that are planned purchases that are not emergencies, but they are things that are larger. They're not necessarily things you can just budget for in your budget. They're a big chunk of money. And then here's where it applies to irregular income. Your short-term savings is designed also to be a buffer to supplement your cash flow. So we're going to talk about the cash flow part in a minute, but it's designed to be that buffer. So if you have lower months that are below your average line of income that you're deciding is your average, then your short-term savings can kind of step in and supplement that. Now, as you do that, though, you want to make sure you replenish it once your income is back up again. So let's say you've got 3 months of income here. Your first month is your average. You've decided your average month is X. Then next month, it's down a bit. It's Y. It's lower than expected. You can draw on your short-term savings to supplement your cash flow and kind of fill in that gap. And then Z, X, Y, and Z. So Z is the third month here, and Z is higher than average. Well, at that point, you put that money back into your short-term savings so that you replenish it and get it back to where it needs to be. It means your third month is going to be a little lower than you might want because you're not going to put that into cash flow. You're going to put it into savings, but that stabilizes your short-term savings again and keeps you in a stable path. So the first thing you want to do before you even worry about irregular income is just build up that short-term savings as much as possible and try to get as much money put away as you can to get that buffer established. Maybe you don't get to 6 months right off the bat, maybe you get to 1 month or so, but start to use that buffer to supplement as soon as you can. Now, you want to set a baseline minimum. So when you're budgeting with irregular income, you want to look at the last, 3, 6, 12 months of income, whatever you can do and whatever is realistic for you, and determine what your base salary is. So again, let's say you're a real estate agent or a massage therapist or a salesperson on commission, and you've been doing it for at least a year. And you've got a lot of variability, but you're going to look at your last 12 months and you're going to get an average. You're going to say, well, on average, though I have ups and downs, my average is going to be this. Whatever that average is, that's basically most of the time you can at least get to that point. So that's going to be your base salary. And again, salary is sort of in quotes here because if you're self-employed, you don't really get a salary. You pay yourself by transferring money from your business account to your personal account. So that would be kind of classified as your salary. So whatever you see coming in as an average based on those ups and down months, that's going to be your base salary. Now, I would cheat a little bit toward the lower end. So if you're looking at your base salary and let's say you have, 9 months are a little bit on the lower side, and then, the rest of the months are a little bit on the higher side, and your average is kind of in the middle. Well, yeah, you could take your average, but I would probably lower it a bit because the norm seems to be closer to those 9 months, a little bit lower. So edge a little bit toward the lower end so you can be conservative and not be scrambling to make up the gaps because you're living on a budget that's higher than realistic. So keep it, use your judgment, but kind of make sure you're looking at a realistic kind of low threshold of what your salary would be. Again, by salary, I mean whatever the income is. So then you're going to budget based on that figure. You're going to budget based on that average or lower to average figure that is your base salary. And you're going to create categories for additional income beyond that. So then what you do is once your minimum is reached, then you start to use the excess, the bonus, which saves into additional categories, or you can add additional amounts to certain categories as well. So before we get to that, let's talk about banking structure. I have other episodes on banking structure as well. I've got a blog post on my website about this if you want to review, but I also recommend setting up a banking structure that encourages you to drop money into certain buckets. So let's say if you're not a business owner, it won't apply to you, you can skip the business account. But let's say you're a business owner or self-employed, you've got a business bank account, then you've got a personal checking. This could be either individual checking if you're single, or joint checking if you're with a partner or married. So whatever that is, your personal checking is kind of your everyday operating account where cash flow comes in and out. Then you've got a personal account for short-term savings. By personal, I mean non-business. So either family or a personal account that is for short-term savings. That's your emergency fund plus your big purchase money. Then your personal tax account. Again, if you're not self-employed, if you don't own a business, this won't apply to you, so just skip that. But if you're self-employed, you want to have a tax account set aside to save tax money into so that you can have that money set aside for your estimated quarterly tax payments. And then finally, I do a personal travel and vacation account as well. And I do this specifically because in all the years I've been doing this, one of the biggest things that just wrecks your budget seems to be travel and vacation. It's just one of those things where, it's emotional. It's like, oh, I deserve to treat myself to vacation, or it's sometimes spontaneous, or, just costs tend to spiral out of control when you're planning a vacation. And so I say, let's set aside a bank account for it and just dump money into it, generously so that you don't have to stress about your vacation wrecking your budget. So I like those accounts. If you're self-employed, you've got your business account, then you've got your checking account. These are all personal accounts after that. So checking account, short-term savings, tax account, and travel and vacation. Again, if you're a W-2 employee, then the business and the personal tax account likely will not apply to you. So that gives you accounts to start saving money into for budgeting purposes. Next, how do you budget? So let's prioritize spending at this point. So YNAB does this really well. YNAB gives you big, broad, overarching, big categories or groupings that really help you prioritize. So I like to model after those. So I start with what's called immediate obligations. These are things like your mortgage or your rent, your taxes, your tax account that you're going to save into, your utilities, your internet access, your groceries, transportation, maybe your car loan, things that are must-haves, things that you can't necessarily live without. You can't operate without those things. That's what you're going to put as first priority. So ideally, you're going to budget again based on that average to lower base salary number, and that's where you're going to start allocating money. Next, I would go to the debt categories. If you have debt, maybe that's credit card payments, student loans. You want to prioritize those things as well and make sure that you don't get behind on those things. I put the mortgage up there under immediate obligations as opposed to debt because your house is more important than any other debt. I would pay that no matter what. So that's why I put it there. But if you have credit card payments or student loans or things that you don't want to get behind on, then make sure that debt payment category is next. Then you've got a big broad grouping called true expenses. True expenses are things like, household items, home maintenance, medical stuff, giving, auto maintenance, just general stuff that you need, but you could always cut back on a little if you really had to. And so that's why that's kind of the third priority. Then after that, you do things for quality of life goals and just for fun kind of stuff. And again, YNAB does a really good job of defaulting to these categories. So I like them. You can kind of rename them to your benefit, but generally this is the idea. So the quality of life goals are things like replenishing your short-term savings, save into your Roth IRA, or maybe your solo 401k if you're a business owner, save into your travel and vacation account, maybe 529 accounts for the kids, things that are future savings for quality of life stuff. But if you have to skip them for a month or two, the world doesn't stop. Like it keeps going. So these are where your excess starts getting into. So by now, you'll see that you're setting your base salary to go into things like immediate obligations, any high priority debt payments, and then true expenses. And that's where you're going to budget your base salary. Then the excess is designed to go into quality of life goals. And then finally, things like just for fun, like family activities, dining out, fun money, entertainment, stuff like that. That's where stuff goes when you have high months, when you have up months that you can use excess money for. I would prioritize the quality of life stuff over the fun stuff, but that's kind of where they end up. So that gives you the ability to prioritize very clearly where your cash flow is going based on what kind of month you're having. And again, the cash flow kind of map, if you can see it in your head, is the different bank accounts hold these things. So the investing and retirement accounts, those are your Roth IRAs, for example, or your solo 401k. That's not a bank account, that's an investment account. Your short-term savings, separate account, cash flow goes in there. Your tax account, separate account goes for that. Travel and vacation, separate account for that. That kind of socks away that money a little bit out of sight, out of mind, so that you're not tempted to borrow it for things that you don't really need to borrow for. It's kind of tucked away in a bucket that is designed for that specific purpose. So your cash flow process, to kind of recap: first, maintain during your average month. So if your average month lets you fill up your budget categories and plan for immediate obligations, debt payments, and true expenses, then you're maintaining. That's kind of where your average flow is. Or maybe if your average month is enough that you can start doing a little bit into your Roth IRA or your solo 401k, then yeah, go for it. So go ahead and add a little extra into that if that's your average month. Then fill up your quality of life and other categories during high months. So if you have a better than average month, then go ahead and keep going down the line and fill up your maybe start maxing out your Roth IRA or your solo 401k. Maybe start maxing out 5 to 9 plan if you have kids. Go ahead and put a bunch more into dining out, entertainment, and fill up those categories as well. And then if you have a low month, if you encounter a month that is lower than average, maybe unexpectedly low, then you can supplement your cash flow from your short-term savings buffer. That's what it's for. You could always just cut back, and if you want to, you could certainly cut back on those months, but it's a little more difficult to do that once we become accustomed to kind of a certain baseline lifestyle. So I see nothing wrong with using that short-term savings buffer to supplement that particular month, assuming that you get back to a rhythm of average to higher than average months coming up. So if it's pretty normal to have a few down months, but it's not the norm, but it's not necessarily consistent, then yeah, go ahead and supplement. And then once you've got a high month again, go ahead and put that money back into short-term savings to build it back up to where it was before. And that way you're not interrupting your cash flow. You're able to maintain for the most part. So a word of caution here. I want to talk to my business owners here for just a minute because this comes up all the time. If you're not a business owner, don't worry about this. But if you are a business owner or you're a 1099 contractor or you're self-employed and you are responsible for your own taxes, you want to get, and let's say you have your own business bank account, you want to get money out of your business bank account as much as possible. I see so many business owners that just love to just keep a pile of cash in their business account. And they don't want to spend it. They just keep in their business account because they kind of identify with their business as their whole identity. And it kind of feels like it's personal money, but it's really not. It's much better, in my opinion, to get that money out of your business account, pay yourself consistently, and go ahead and invest that money into your Roth IRA, into your solo 401k. Invest that money into building up your short-term savings. Put that money into your tax account so you're not surprised in your quarterly estimate tax payment time. Go ahead and think of yourself as being on a payroll. It's not literally a payroll, most likely, if you're just paying yourself directly as a distribution. But the more you start to think of it as, hey, this is my income, it has a lot of organizational benefits because it helps you plan better. And then psychologically, there's something magical about paying yourself income that goes into your personal account that makes you feel like you are literally making money. If it's sitting in your business account, it just kind of gets a little bit ambiguous. And I see so many business owners just kind of get into cash flow issues because they just don't have that clear separation between, hey, I'm paying myself money out of my account that's personal income. So I'd advise you to consistently get that money out of your business bank account, transfer it consistently, and treat that like a salary. So wrapping up, some keys to success that I've seen. One is stay on top of it. One of the biggest pitfalls I see is people that they start budgeting and then they let 3 weeks go by without looking at it. And then they open up their budgeting app and it's like, oh, I've got 200 transactions to categorize and I don't feel like doing it. So I'm just going to give up. So stay on top of it. Open your app every couple of days. I open YNAB every 2 to 3 days and categorize things. And I only have like 10 things at a time to worry about. So it goes really quick. And definitely use mobile apps, whether it's YNAB or something else. The mobile app is going to make it much easier because you're not going to worry about, sitting down at your computer and opening it up and going through a whole thing. You can just pop open your mobile app, do quick categorizations while you're waiting in line somewhere, and you're done. So mobile apps make it really easy to stay on top of your budget. Also, don't let little glitches stop you. You're going to have glitches along the way. You're going to have little issues that come up, and maybe your bank syncing stops or breaks or something, or maybe something doesn't go quite right. Don't let little glitches trip you up. Work through them. Use the support system through your budgeting tool, or reach out to me. I'll coach you through it. Whatever it is, just don't let little glitches stop you, and don't let perfection get in the way. If you overspend here and there and you think, oh, wow, I messed up my budget, just, cover it somewhere else, move on, fix it, and life goes on. Don't let little issues and the pursuit of perfection get in the way. And finally, I'm putting this in big, bold letters in your mind. If you're a business owner, pay your quarterly tax payments. I harp on this a ton because I see it over and over. I see that so many business owners just do not pay their quarterly tax payments. They just don't do it. And you need to do it. You need to make sure you pay it on time every quarter to avoid penalties and avoid getting behind with the IRS. Just do it. Just set aside that personal bank account that is designed for holding your tax money, and then put the right amount. The right amount is beyond the scope of this episode, but put the right amount in there each month so that you have enough to pay your quarterly estimates, and then pay them. Do it, do it, do it. Do not skimp on this. Just make it happen. And by the way, your tax account should be a personal account. So many business owners pay their quarterly estimates out of their business account, but usually I work with LLCs and S Corps, and those are pass-through entities, which means your company, your business is not being taxed. You personally are taxed. So your quarterly estimated tax payment should be coming out of your personal account. So use a personal account for that. So with that is an overview of budgeting with irregular income. I promise it can be done. I've done it for years. Many people I work with are able to get it done once we kind of work through some of these glitches and kinks and issues. And it's not super easy to necessarily just do right off the bat. It takes a few months to really get good at it, but it can be done. And I would argue that it's even more important for, self-employed people with irregular income, because the variability is so difficult to manage. So having a budget and a plan to budget with that irregular income is incredibly important and incredibly valuable. So I love working with entrepreneurs. I am one. I have been for 25 years. It's in my DNA. And again, there's also commission salespeople that are W-2 employees that have irregular income as well. So I don't want to leave them out. But a lot of the people I work with also are self-employed entrepreneurs that deal with that up and down cash flow. It can be challenging, but it can be done. So that should give you a roadmap for getting started. And as always, I always mention this, and I mean it. If you have questions, reach out to me. Let me know. You can email me at podcast@elevationfinancial.com, or just reach out via my website. I invite anyone to book one complimentary money session with me. Go to elevationfinancial.com, use the friendly button on the homepage, and I promise you don't have to work with me if you don't want to long term. We can just have a complimentary discussion while I answer some questions for you, and happy to chat either way. So thanks as always for joining me today. Have a great day. We'll see you next time.